I will be reading the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative Investigative Report, released May 2022, by Assistant Secretary, Indian Affairs, Brian Newland. United States Department of the Interior, Office of the Secretary, Washington, D.C., April 1st, 2022. The Honorable Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, Washington, D.C. Dear Madam Secretary, on June 22, 2021, you issued a memorandum directing Department of the Interior agencies to coordinate an investigation into the Federal Indian Boarding School System, to examine the scope of the system with a focus on the location of schools, burial sites, and identification of children who attended the schools. You also directed that I submit a report of our investigation by April 1st, 2022. In accordance with your direction, I am submitting to you the first Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative Investigative Report. This report shows for the first time that between 1819 and 1969, the United States operated or supported 408 boarding schools across 37 states, or then territories, including 21 schools in Alaska and 7 schools in Hawaii. This report identifies each of those schools by name and location, some of which operated across multiple sites. This report confirms that the United States directly targeted American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian children in the pursuit of a policy of cultural assimilation that coincided with Indian territorial dispossession. It identifies the federal Indian boarding schools that were used as a means for these ends, along with at least 53 burial sites for children across the system, with more site discoveries and data expected as we continue our search. The report highlights some of the conditions these children endured at these schools and raises important questions about the short-term and long-term consequences of the federal Indian boarding school system on Indian tribes, Alaska Natives, and the Native Hawaiian community. I am recommending further investigation to examine those consequences. This report places the federal Indian boarding school system in its historical context, explaining that the United States established this system as part of a broader objective to dispossess Indian tribes, Alaska Native villages, and the Native Hawaiian community of their territories to support the expansion of the United States. The federal Indian boarding school policy was intentionally targeted at American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian children to assimilate them and, consequently, take their territories. I believe that this historical context is important to understand the intent and scale of the federal Indian boarding school system and why it persisted for 150 years. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and its resulting closures of federal facilities hampered our ability to obtain and review a number of documents needed to answer all of the questions you posed to us in your June 22, 2021 memorandum. Our work was also made more difficult by the fact that the department was operating under a continuing resolution for much of the past year, which limited the funds available to examine some issues. For those reasons, I am recommending further research under the appropriation authority Congress has granted under the fiscal year 2022 Consolidated Appropriations Act, PL 117-103. This report, as I see it, is only a first step to acknowledge the experiences of federal Indian boarding school children. It notes a desire from people across Indian country and the Native Hawaiian community to share their individual and family experiences within the federal Indian boarding school system and the resulting impacts today. This report also presents an opportunity for us to reorient our federal policies to support the revitalization of tribal languages and cultural practices. This reorientation of federal policy is necessary to counteract nearly 2 centuries of federal policies aimed at the destruction of tribal languages and cultures. In turn, we can help begin a healing process for Indian country and the Native Hawaiian community and the United States, from the Alaskan tundra to the Florida Everglades and everywhere in between. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your leadership to look at the legacy of federal Indian boarding schools and to all who are working hard to complete this needed work. Sincerely, Brian Newland, Assistant Secretary, Indian Affairs. In 1886, the Apache Wars ended when Chiricahua Apache leader Geronimo and his band surrendered to the United States. Critical for westward expansion, the U.S. Senate passed the following resolution thereafter. Resolved, that the Secretary of War be directed to communicate to the Senate all dispatches of General Miles referring to the surrender of Geronimo, and all instructions given to the correspondence with General Miles in reference to the same. Although neither Geronimo nor others in his band were charged with or tried for crimes under U.S. courts, President Cleveland ordered for Geronimo and his band to be removed from present-day Arizona and held captive indefinitely in Florida as U.S. prisoners of war. Under U.S. military control, surviving Apache children were forcibly removed from their families and shipped by train to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. Some children were later returned to their families as confinement of the Chiricahua Apache Band extended across U.S. military installations, demonstrating that all Indians, including Indian children, hold a distinct political status in the United States. Some Apache children never returned, comprising 1/4 of Carlisle gravesites.